Hi guys, today we're going to take a look at monopolies as market structures, and this is a quick lecture overview that we're going to go through everything minus natural monopolies, I guess. So at different points I'm going to ask you to pause or switch to a different video, but the goal of this is to give you everything in one quick shot, and we'll be able to use this at different points throughout our classroom or for our work together. First off, don't forget that monopolies are both fun to play and were real people in the past. You don't see many real monopolies anymore today, especially in the United States, as our government tries to limit the power of individual firms, thus getting rid of monopolies. But both monopolies have happened in the past, and they happen still in countries with less government regulation. What we need to do is define monopolies, graph them, look at maximization levels. We're going to skip natural monopolies for now, evaluate monopolies in the marketplace and look at their efficiency, and then consider ways to regulate monopolies. I also am going to leave price discrimination out of this lecture. I feel it comes up better as a separate topic to look at rather than examining it now. So when we define monopolies, this is an activity or an issue you should have had in your notebooks from when we started market structures. But monopolies have one producer. There's only one firm in the marketplace, and that firm can dictate everything. Since the monopoly is only one firm, there's really no good substitute for that monopoly. You can't really go anywhere else and get a similar product. Monopolies, because of this, can set the price in the market to be whatever they want. They are definitely price makers, and it's only one firm doing that. So it's even more important to consider the power one firm has. With monopolies, there are extremely high barriers to the marketplace, both to entering and to leaving. Barriers to entry are usually because it's very costly to compete with that one firm. They have very aggressive tactics for manipulating the marketplace, and they might own vertical integration. They might own all the resources to make that particular good, or they might own all the types of industries making that good through horizontal integration. It's very difficult to compete with monopolies, which is why we saw, I believe it was Carnegie in the United States, his steel production was vertically integrated. He owned all the process from the raw materials to the final production of steel in the United States, and it made it very hard to compete with his product. For exit from market, it's also really hard for monopolies to leave marketplaces. And this is something that you might not really think about, but for monopolies, they provide a good to the consumer that, at least in theory, no one else can do well. So it's very hard for monopolies to leave the marketplace because it leaves the marketplace wanting that product. So, and then I didn't put on the slide here, but product differentiation, well, there would be none because they have no clear substitutes, but also market power. Monopolies can do whatever they want, and it makes them very dangerous. So let's move into graphing monopolies and what this would look like. When we looked at perfectly competitive markets, we knew that the marketplace was dictated by price makers. Price makers, I'm sorry, the perfectly competitive marketplace is dictated by price takers. PCMs cannot dictate whatever price they want in the marketplace. They have to take whatever price all the other firms are also taking. So as a monopoly, and we know that they're price takers, we're going to see a different scenario. You should have an activity in front of you I'd like you to complete. Pause the video and fill out your data chart at the very least. This one should be pretty simple. We know at this point what total, marginal, and average revenue are, but these three values are now different for monopolies. So pause the video and fill that out, and we'll move forward, and then I'll have you graph after you make sure you've got the data correct. Okay, so I'm going to move forward and show you the answers, but I hope that you've done the math. The math here is not complicated, but don't cheat. Don't cheat. Pause the video, do the math. But here are your answers. I wanted you to see these before you graph, since we're probably doing this asynchronously. So now that you've got the values, go ahead and graph and answer the questions on your worksheet and consider what this means as you graph. After you're done graphing, and we'll go over this when we're together again in class, you should notice that the total revenue increases with output as you would expect, but the demand and marginal revenue curves are now separate. In fact, the marginal revenue curve has a slope that is 2 times the slope of the demand curve. And we're going to see here in a moment, we're going to stop and graph the monopolies all together. We're going to see that there's a lot that also now happens because of that. So let's pause. I know I've got a graph here, but I've linked to another video where I actually walk through the graph with you, but all monopolies are going to have this same basic shape. So pause and flip over to my other video, graph the long and short run monopolies curve. We'll talk about some of the details from that video when we come back to this lecture. So again, pause, go to the graphing video, and then we'll come back. When we graphed monopolies, we saw that all monopolies will be able to make a large amount of profit. In this case, profit maximization will still occur where MC equals MR. And at that level, you can see on this graph, then the difference between the average revenue and average total cost curve, or points A and B on your graph, produce a fair amount of profit for long and short run monopolies. So monopolies will always produce economic profit even in the long run, unless just the monopolies fail to exist anymore. So we know that monopolies will always make profit, and it should be a pretty significant area on the graph. Now there are some scenarios where the cost might just become too great. If monopolists produce and the costs are too great and they don't change their prices, they could have short-term losses. We could calculate that, but I've got to tell you that's not a scenario that I've seen a lot of. But you at least need to know that it's a plausible scenario. So if you see that on a paper 3, you can go ahead and calculate that. This is another scenario where if you calculated the economic losses, you will want to make sure the economic losses are not greater than the total fixed costs at that quantity level, like we have done with perfectly competitive markets. But because this is such an odd scenario, you often will not see average variable costs graphed for a monopolist firm. Another goal of some firms is revenue maximization, and revenue maximization would occur where MR equals 0. If you have profit maximization, and here's a slightly different graph, so let's take a look. If you have profit maximization where MC equals MR, the monopolist walks away with a profit of the areas of the two rectangles A plus B. If you're focusing on revenue maximization, the monopolist firm will still create economic profit, but at the areas of B and C. Now, if we had actual values here, we might be able to calculate out. It looks like the revenue maximization area is smaller, and it should be mathematically, but it doesn't look like it's probably going to be significantly smaller. So please know that some firms, some monopolists also want to make as much as they can in the marketplace. So I told you we're going to skip the natural monopolies discussion for a different lecture. So you'll see that coming up in a bit. But let's just take a look and evaluate advantages and disadvantages of having monopolies in the marketplace. There are advantages, surprisingly. This is one firm that absolutely can make economic profit. And just because a firm makes profit doesn't mean that they are doing it selfishly. Making a profit means you can refine your product and make it better. You can put money into research and development and related products. You can look for efficiencies in the marketplace that maybe other firms don't have the time to invest money into. Monopolies are generally very large, so you can see a reduction of costs and production capabilities because they are so big. The problem with monopolies is they can dictate the entire marketplace. So if they really wanted to, they can offer a poor quality product at a very high price, and there's nothing to stop them from doing that. There's potential lack of incentive if they aren't competing with anybody in the marketplace. If there's no real near substitute, monopolies can do whatever it is that they want. So monopolies can dictate value in the marketplace compared to perfectly competitive markets. And I wanted to put these two slides in just to demonstrate that you can graphically show that monopolies create significant welfare loss. If we went back to this monopolies graph, if they're producing at a level of MC equals MR and not producing out to the allocatively efficient level, monopolies create dead weight loss in the fact that they're not producing at an allocatively efficient level. It's something that's typically not graphed, but at least you want to know that that's a possibility. Now let's talk about efficiencies, and I mentioned some of this when, sorry, go back to that. Let's talk about efficiencies, and I mentioned some of this when I did my individual graph for the monopolist firm. But monopolies are not allocatively or productively efficient. Allocative efficiency occurs when demand equals supply, or in this case, demand equals marginal cost. That point, as we can see here, is different than the point for profit maximization. It's also different than the point for lowest average total cost or productive efficiency. So monopolist firms, unless they choose to produce at MC equals D or supply equals demand, unless they choose to produce here, they're not meeting allocative efficiency. And because most monopolists will not produce where average total costs are the lowest, they're also not going to produce at a productive efficiently level either. And last, I know I've flown through a lot of this, but we need to consider then what governments can do to regulate monopolies to try to keep monopolies in check. Again, we're going to ignore natural monopolies, but the government has some control over what they do with natural monopolies. But the largest thing that governments will do to restrict monopoly power is antitrust legislation, or try to break up big firms that are nearing monopolies. Encourage lawmakers to set laws to limit monopolies or to limit the price monopolies can charge. And we see this then a lot with how firms merge and why in the United States, why the FCC gets involved with regulating firms that merge together if they become too big, control too much of the market power. Even though they're not monopolies, as near monopolies, they have some of the same control. So that's really the best way for the government to dictate and control market power. So guys, I know that was quick, and I know we skipped over natural monopolies and price discrimination, but that was meant to give you an overview separate from class about the goal, the shapes, and the overall actions of a monopolist firm.